Hi, you're listening to The Sociology Show, a podcast about absolutely anything to do with the wonderful world of sociology. Whether you're a teacher, a lecturer, a student, or just taking a passing interest, this podcast will look at a range of issues from social class, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, religion, crime, education, and anything else that sociology has to offer. My name is Matthew Wilkin, and each episode I will speak to someone working in the field of sociology and let them explain all about their own interests, their research, and their experiences. So, put your earphones in, turn the volume up, and let's be sociology geeks together, eh? Hello and welcome to The Sociology Show. The Sociology Show podcast is brought to you in association with Tutor2U Sociology, the exam performance specialist for A-level and GCSE sociology students and teachers. And so you can visit their website, which is tutor2u.net/sociology. And there you can pick up revision guides, flashcards, revision videos, and everything else that you need for your A-level or GCSE sociology studies. And so on to this episode, and I'm delighted to welcome my guest, Phil Mitchell. Phil, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I should have said Phil. Is it doctor? Is it professor? Is it just Phil? I should have asked.
Oh gosh, I'm nowhere near as important or as intelligent as that, I'm afraid. It's just plain old Phil.
That's good for me. That's good for me. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, Phil?
Yeah, so my name's Phil Mitchell. I get lots of EastEnders jokes, so anyone who's listening will appreciate the pun. Thankfully, I don't look anything like Phil Mitchell. I look more like his son, Ben Mitchell, which I think is a good thing. But anyway, so I've been working as a counsellor, psychotherapist for about 16 and a half years, and I work with boys and men who've experienced different types of sexual abuse as children, as adults, sometimes sadly as both. Through that work, I've actually found that I'm working with more boys and men who've been affected by other types of abuse, other types of adverse experiences, some of it clearly fueled by sort of misandry, sort of man-hating, some of it not. But I also provide supervision to qualified and trainee counsellors and to other practitioners working in the field of abuse and counselling. And I do lots of training, sort of webinars online. I go around the country when we're not in lockdown, addressing various issues to do with the sexual abuse and exploitation of boys and men. And I guess that's kind of me. That's a bit about what I do.
Are you on a quite small number of people that do this, Phil? I'm wondering how many people actually work specialising particularly in male abuse and male concerns.
Well, I think there's a growing number. So there are a few organisations. There are not many, to the best of my knowledge, but there are a few dotted about the country who are organisations where they do work with just men. You have Survivors in Manchester. You've got the Mankind Initiative. You've got services down south that I know of, but I don't have a lot to do with them just because of geography. And they do work with just boys and men or just men. So there is a growing number, but in comparisons to the services that work with just girls and women, they are small. And I think there's a growing number of individuals, sort of professors, psychologists, various workers who are working in some cases only with, and in others predominantly with boys and men. But I think we're growing in number, I like to think, but I think we could always do with more.
That's good to hear that it is growing in number. Now, you just mentioned the word misandry. That's how I actually came across you, actually. So I was doing some research on Twitter, typing in the word misandry, and you seem to be the go-to person for that particular topic. Is that a fair assumption? Are you the go-to man?
I'm not. I mean, I think there's a compliment in there somewhere. I think. Absolutely. I don't know, or maybe I'm just living on Twitter too much and I need to take a break. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think So I've been in private practice as a counsellor now for 4 years-ish, something like that. I've done it for years before then, but on a very part-time basis, but I've been doing it for the last sort of 4 years-ish full-time. And I think what I've kind of learned is just how rife misandry really is, and how it is dismissed and minimised as not a real issue, with many saying it doesn't exist at all. But it does. There's just too much evidence out there. So yeah, in my work with boys and men that have been abused as children or as adults or both, or etc., I found that for some of them, not all, but some of them, there was, their experiences in some cases were underpinned by a real man or male hating attitude. And some of the boys and men I have worked with have said, well, my perpetrator said this to me, he said this to me, she said this to me, the police said this to me. And it's pretty obvious that these things, because of issues around sex and gender, would never have been said if this was a girl or woman saying it. I mean, one of the things I often talk about in my trainings is the identification element. So across the country, you have some of them are called multi-agency child sexual exploitation teams. Some are called multi-agency exploitation teams. For example, what you'd have a team of people, social workers, education workers, health workers, youth offending workers, all working together to safeguard children and young people in different ways. Now, years ago, many of these were child sexual exploitation teams. And now, because of criminal exploitation getting more of the spotlight, some of them have changed to become exploitation teams. So the idea is that they work together to tackle the exploitation of children. The problem that you have is the gender bias within this. And so often what you have, and I know this from people I work with, people contacting me online, the training I deliver, what you have is you have a team, an exploitation team, and they will, for example, have a list of children who they have assessed as being at risk of or known to be involved in criminal exploitation, so being groomed to sell drugs, move drugs, etc. Most of them, young people on that list, are boys. Then you look at the list of children at risk of or experiencing sexual exploitation, girls, predominantly girls. But when you look at these lists, what you find is that the children where there's been no disclosure, where you don't know for a fact that they have been criminally or sexually exploited, the boys and the girls are displaying exactly the same warning signs. You have a boy who's coming home late from school, or he doesn't go to school. He's bunking off. He's not telling anyone where he's been. He's turning up with a bag of drugs. He won't tell anybody where he's got it from. He's been hanging around with an older man in town, and everyone thinks, well, that's crime. It's drugs. It's youth offending. He might be being groomed for drugs. But then you see a girl, and the girl's displaying exactly those same behaviours, hanging around with the same or a similar older man, and people are much quicker to think child sexual exploitation. And an element within that is misandry. Now, I'm not saying all the professionals hate these boys. You know, misandry is it can be defined as the hatred of males. But it's also about the contempt. Yeah, we believe it's okay to give boys and men a lesser response simply because they are male. Now, that's not extreme, vicious, hateful misandry, but it's still on that scale somewhere, and that's part of the problem. And so, all you have to do is for example, go to Twitter, which I'm on there a lot. I probably should not be on there as often as I am, perhaps. But if you go to Twitter and just type in, for example, kill all women, you will see, last time I checked, about 9 profiles that will come up. Type in kill all men, you'll see about 80 or 90 that come up. And I think that is just one of many examples that highlight how we're in a part of society thinks it's okay to say, let's kill all men, but it's absolutely unacceptable to say, let's kill all women. I'm not saying we should go around saying, let's kill all everybody and anyone or all of that, but I think it highlights a point, and that thinking, those attitudes are very much rife. And what you often hear is a lot of people going, oh, it's just words, it's hurt feelings. Well, first of all, misandry is a lot more than just hurt feelings. But even if it is about hurt feelings, well, hang on a minute. When, a report's just come out from the UN that says a certain percentage of girls and women have reported feeling really scared. Well, hang on. If we're taking those feelings as valid and we're giving them attention, why are we not giving the feelings and thoughts and emotions of boys and men valid and attention? So there's that issue. But actually, misandry, as I've said, is kind of often categorised as the hateful attitude, the viewing boys and men as contemptible. And if you have a belief that, well, boys and men are just nothing, they're scum, they're trash, it's okay to say kill them all, they're all abusive, you have certain negative, adverse, horrible views of boys and men, and you have that belief, you have that attitude inside you, the question is, how might that attitude and belief inform behaviour that you display that could adversely affect boys and men. And it's the simple premise of human beings. A lot of our behaviour is informed by what we believe. If you're scared of spiders, you see a spider, you jump, you scream. You do that because you believe that spiders are scary. Yeah. And so, that's just a basic example. But if you have a certain belief about a group of people or something like that or anything like that, well, if you have a certain belief about a group of people, how might that belief influence behaviour that you could display that might impact that group of people? And I think that's really what we need to think about.
Yeah, I've read a lot of stuff, particularly about the education system, how boys are viewed there. And it starts as young as that, doesn't it? Because that's quite problematic. Just anecdotally, I heard a story, a friend of mine, their child goes to a school where they've got two groups in an academic year. And one of the groups was performing much higher than the other. And the head teacher actually said, well, we'd expect that group to perform lower because there's more boys in there. And I just thought that was just kind of a casual throwaway comment. But misandry doesn't have to be full-on extreme man-hating, does it? It's kind of that casual conversational pieces as well.
Absolutely. Now, some people will probably disagree with that. And that's fine. Everyone's allowed to disagree. But I guess my view is no. It's kind of like on a scale, just like everything's on a scale. There was a young woman, I think it was a few years ago, and she murdered her partner. I can't remember exactly why now. But when it all sort of came out in the press, and I'm not saying we should believe everything we read in the press, of course, but when certain media outlets were reporting on this, she was saying, I'm a proud man hater. I am a proud man hater. I'm a proud misandrist. I hate men. And I guess it's the question is how much did that hate she has for men influence her behaviour to kill her partner? I think it's a valid question. But yes, education is a real issue, and especially at the minute with where we're reading of boys in was it a school or a college, I can't remember, have been lined up in front of girls and told to apologise to those girls for crimes that other men have committed. It's outrageous. And the really scary thing is that if we were to do that with any other demographic, there would be a mass outcry. There would be a huge, furious response to this. But because it's boys, there are people who are saying it's outrageous and it's terrible and it's an louder outcry with that. And thankfully, some of these boys have said this is not on, this is not okay. And they're absolutely right, it's not. But I think what you have is it's about sort of percentages and maths to some degree. So I try and pick and choose the debates I get involved in on Twitter, and I do my best to just avoid and ignore people now, which is sometimes easier said than done. But one of the things that I often find is people are saying, well, yeah, the problems that boys and men have, it's because of men. Well, first of all, I'm not sure it's strictly true like that. It's not as black and white as that. But even if it is, so what? If some powerful, abusive men are causing problems that other men are experiencing, are we kind of suggesting that they're not worthy of attention because they're in the same sex group? What? No, that's not okay. Why would we think that? Why do we think that that's okay? And I think often what I hear is people will say to me, so for example, I will say to someone, do you think it's acceptable that we get girls and line them up in front of boys and get them to apologise for the abusive behaviours other women have done, such as false allegations, paternity fraud, other types of abuse in relationships? Do you think that's okay? And go, no, that's terrible. But do you know what? Those things that you've just said, paternity fraud, false allegations, violence by women, that doesn't happen nowhere near as much as the abuse perpetrated by males. So my response to that is often, okay, so are you saying that because a minority of one group committing abuse is bigger than the minority of another group committing abuse, it's okay to give the entire group hate and judgment and prejudice? Does that make any sense? And I often find that people kind of, it gets broken down when you give them logic and things, but it's ultimately just hateful stuff that I think we really do need to challenge.
Yeah, well, I also wonder what we are teaching a generation of sons and young boys. If they are growing up with a narrative that men are evil, men are criminal, they're rapists, etc. What what are we teaching them?
Absolutely. And I honestly do think in years to come, maybe even months to come, we're going to see the results of this. Colleagues and I, anecdotally, are already getting messages and emails from boys and young men in schools and colleges saying words to the effect of, "Am I bad because I'm a boy?" A colleague of mine told me that a boy got in touch with her and said, "Should I change my sex because I don't want to rape anybody?" It's just so extreme. And I think what we need to be doing is teaching children and young people in schools, all children, the importance of respect in relationships, the importance of respect in friendships, not promote a very narrow-minded, rigid, gendered message that's often, that's often informed by ideology rather than any decent science that goes, boys are perpetrators, girls are victims. It's just too simple. And I think, what we have to be kind of saying is you're not bad because you're a boy. Being a boy does not make you bad. We've got all these words that are being bandied around like patriarchy, toxic masculinity, all of these sorts of things. The really scary thing on social media, I've seen professionals, well, according to their profiles, they are social workers, psychologists, youth workers, people that, work with children and vulnerable people. And they are absolutely blatant in their misandry, saying, yeah, it's a man's problem, men need to take responsibility, men need to stop doing this, men need to stop doing that, yes, it's all a problem with men, absolutely, yeah, who's causing this problem? Yeah, it's men again, and all of that. And I'm thinking, wow, if a boy that you're working with was to see this, what would they think? How would that? And again, if you've got these attitudes in your head, how could they inform your practice when working with a boy? I remember one boy I worked with, this is a while ago now, but he said to me that his social worker told him that you're part of the patriarchy, you need to think about how you can be more of an ally to girls and women, or words to that effect. And he had done nothing that, in my view, warranted that response. But yeah, I think we are giving a very harmful message to boys and men. And sometimes that's implicit, sometimes it's explicit. And, all you need to do, certainly, if you look at the Office of National Statistics, the vast majority of people who are going to experience violence in the street are men. What's reported and recorded is the methods, well, it doesn't really matter because other men are doing it to you. So you're all in the same group. So we're going to lump all the decent men in with the bad and abusive men, and we don't really care. Oh, but hang on a minute. When a girl or a woman goes through something horrific on the street, despite the fact that statistically that's less likely to happen compared to it happening to males, we're thinking, yeah, but a male does it, well, that's really bad, we have to address it. And again, it's just this gendered war that's being promoted, which I just don't think is helpful. And if anything, it creates a big gap and a big divide. And what we kind of really need to do is challenge people on their behaviour. And I don't necessarily think making sex or gender a part of it is helpful.
I mean, there seems to be a bit of a blind spot for me. You just mentioned about patriarchy, because what often seems to be ignored from what I can see is that both men and women contribute to patriarchy, and both can be damaged by it as well. But it seems to be quite one-eyed in the argument.
I think it depends on how we define patriarchy and what it means. And I think, you could speak to someone and they'll go, patriarchy is ABC. Someone else will say patriarchy is XYZ. I think that what is often peddled is that patriarchy is this huge system run by men for men to oppress women. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Perhaps years and years and years ago, maybe, but now, no. And I think what kind of happens is you're saying that, and again, what we do is we say men are part of the patriarchy, but actually, if we're referring to the patriarchy as this system of big, rich, powerful men, that's a significant minority of men on the planet. That's not representative of men in general at all. That makes no sense. And I think that, if there really was this huge patriarchy to oppress women and to big men up and everything. Well, I'm really not convinced that we'd have so many men dying by suicide, that we'd have so many men who are dying at workplace fatality deaths, that we'd have so many men homeless, that we'd have so many men dying on the street. If that's the patriarchy, it's not doing a very good job, let's put it that way. And actually what you have, if there is a patriarchy, and I seriously question that, certainly in the way that's being peddled currently, I think what we have is we've got more shelters for women than men. We've got more services for women than men. More funding goes to women than men. We've got, for example, we've got a violence against women and girls strategy. We don't have a violence against men and boys strategy, despite the fact that more boys and men are dying from violence, that more men are killed and so on. And again, it's like, well, why do we have that? So if there really is a patriarchy in the way that is being peddled, in the way that I just said, well, it seems to be that it's actually doing more for girls and women than boys and men. It was considered, I can't remember the guy's name, was it Ben Bradley, the MP? He was saying, we have a minister for girls, women and equalities. Wouldn't it be really good if we had one for boys and men too? He got huge amounts of abuse just for making that suggestion. And I think the very fact that he got all of that abuse for making that simple suggestion speaks volumes.
Does it come down to then? I'm just thinking about the Red Pill documentary. There's quite a lot of evidence that says if you look at it on a very basic level, we actually value women's lives above men.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's quite a lot of research out there. A lot of boys and men that I have come across since the recent debates that have been on the news, I find that they're in two camps. They either say, well, misandry doesn't exist, men are the problem, we need to, these women shouldn't be feeling like this, we need to look after them, we need to protect them, we need to do what we can, us men need to shut up and do better and all of that. But then the other group that I've experienced are kind of saying, well, women shouldn't be experiencing this, it's horrible, it's terrible, but I don't want to be lumped in I'm a decent guy, I don't want to be lumped in with murderers and rapists just because I'm a man. I don't want that. But have you noticed the commonality that both groups have got is that none of them are saying, yes, we want women to be abused, raped and murdered. None of them are saying that. They're actively and explicitly saying, we don't want this. The methods they use and how they go about it and languages they use might be very different from one group to the next. But no, most decent people, most men don't want girls and women to go through this. Of course they don't. Nobody wants that. What sort of person would you be to want that? But I think that's the thing. We see it all the time. So an example, there are 4 that I'm aware of, sort of social experiments, I think you would call them, and they walk down the street. And it's all role play, but the passers-by, the bystanders, the members of the public don't know that. And what happens is, in the first sort of scenario, man and woman walking down the street, and the man is pushing the woman, dragging her around, sort of looking like he's hitting her. And men and women run towards, saying, that's not okay. They say to the woman, you don't have to put up with this is not all right. They tell the man, this is unacceptable, what do you think you're doing? In some cases, the men run over to the man, grab hold of him and push him up against the wall. But then that it's now the woman hitting and pushing the man. And you get very, very, very little people intervening. In some scenarios, nobody intervenes. In some scenarios, there are people laughing and joking. In others, there are people recording the woman hitting the man on their phone. And in other scenarios, what you have is you've got people holding the man while the woman hits him. Right? I mean, again, that's not just one example. There are 4 social experiments that kind of show, we will run towards sort of girls and women and help them. And there's lots of science behind that, in terms of why and what that's about. And I'm certainly not saying there's anything wrong with that. If we see someone, man or woman, if we see someone in need and they need help and it's safe, we go and approach and we want to help them out. Nothing wrong with that. But we're less likely to do that if it's a boy or a man. Yeah. And what we are more prone to do is we go the other way, where actually we expect boys and men to endure hate, nasty comments, abuse, things like that. In my practice, I see a number of men and their partners hit them, kick them, punch them, do all sorts of things to them. Some of the men themselves will go, well, I've just been brought up that a man should never hit a woman. Okay, what about bringing people up to say we shouldn't really be hitting each other at all? And let's just kind of give each other mutual respect, rather than promoting this really rigid, harmful, problematic, gendered message that says we should protect women at all costs. and it's fine if you want to hit a man. Now, again, I know it's not necessarily simple as that, but in some areas, I think that's the message, the oversimplified message that is being promoted and in some cases being heard.
Yeah, I saw an experiment, you might be aware of it yourself, Phil, where they got someone to be slumped in a doorway as if they would completely passed out and possibly dead. And now, of course, when that was a woman in the doorway, everyone stopped to help. If it was a man slumped in a doorway, passed out, people just walked past. I mean, almost as if people just walked past, they didn't really care.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's what we see. Again, it's all these social experiments, where there was a girl who was sort of wandering around on her own, and lots of people said, "Are you all right? Where's your parents? What's happening?" But then they did exactly the same experiment. It was a boy. And don't get me wrong, a couple of people stopped, but nowhere near as many in comparison. And, you know, when I deliver training, one of the things that I often, you know, we talk about examples where, let's just imagine you walking down the street, you see a man and he's holding onto a girl's hand and she's going, no, get off me, and screaming. People go, I'd be really worried. I don't know if I'd intervene. I might not feel safe, but if I did, I'd be really worried. I'd go, is this person your dad? Do you know them? And so on. But then I say, okay, now let's just say that man is doing the same thing, but it's not a little girl, it's a little boy. There's that awkward silence where the metaphorical tumbleweed rolls past and you know what everybody is thinking. And I go, so what's the silence about? And they go, well, I'd probably just think it's a dad disciplining some unruly boy. And I go, you might be right, but you might not be. But notice the bias that's in place there when when a girl swaps to a boy and a boy swaps to a girl.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
The objectification thing interests me because, you know, men do get criticised for as much as suggesting that a woman's attractive, but the kind of suggestion that women wouldn't do the same when they're watching TV or an attractive actor or whoever it may be. I mean, it's
ridiculous. It's just not true. It's just not true. So I, at the minute, Celebrity Bake Off is on Channel 4 for Stand Up to Cancer.
Yeah.
And I'm watching it because that's just how exciting my life is. And when is it James McAvoy? That's it. He was in Shameless on Channel 4 years ago. He was in some of the X-Men films and so on. And he's a very sort of muscular, attractive guy, Scottish guy. And he made some very seductive poses, shall we say. And when I was sort of looking on Twitter and having a look, huge numbers of people, men and women to be fair, huge numbers of people were objectifying him, saying how good looking and all of this sort of stuff. And some of it was quite explicit, some was mild, it all varied. But again, I'm thinking, well, what does James think of this? Is he all right with this? Is he bothered? Does he care? Does it make him feel good? Does it make him feel objectified? I guess we don't know. But the point is, it's like, to what level do we take that? To what level do we say that it's unacceptable? And if we're saying, well, actually, if we're doing it to women, there's a certain level where we would deem it unacceptable. If we do it to men, there's a different level. Well, what are we basing that difference on? If we're basing it simply on the fact that, you know, the sexes and the genders are different, why? What's that all about? And why do we do that? You know, when I've you know, I'm kind of older now, but when I was younger and people come up to me and say, oh, you know, you're a very attractive, do you mind if I buy you a drink? It doesn't happen now, sadly. But, you know, that alone, I'd be, well, yeah, that's nice. I'll take a drink off you and that's nice and we'll have a chat and it might lead somewhere, it might not. But I think what we have to get is where does the line stop? Where does the line start and where does it stop? And so if we, you know, so I've worked with men where they have told me, and I've got permission to say all this, but they've told me that they were thrown out of a club or a pub because they went up to a woman and said, oh, you know, you're a very attractive woman. Do you mind if I buy you a drink? And so the women's gone, no, I'm just here with my friend. And they're going, okay, we'll have a good night. And then the women have gone to the bouncer and said, that man is sexually harassing me, and the bouncers have thrown them out on the woman's word alone. And when and I can think of two guys in particular, and they've gone, and they've said, Phil, I didn't know that was sexual harassment. I'm really, really worried that I'll get a criminal record and all that. Well, hang on a minute. if people stop approaching people and talking to them, then we're going to die out as a species. You know, and I think it's where does the line get drawn? And I think part of the narrative that's currently being promoted really, it magnifies the victimhood of girls and women in a really unhelpful way. I'm not saying that girls and women have got it easy, they're never victims, stop mourning. I'm not saying that at all. Yes, they are victims of horrific, terrible abuse that should never happen. Sadly, we're always going to live in a world where there's different types of abuse. That's sadly nothing, we just need to deal with it. We're never going to eradicate it, just need to kind of deal with it. But I think what we have to do is kind of be really clear on what is acceptable behaviour and what is unacceptable behaviour. And the problem that we have is our perception of sex and gender comes into it, and that informs what we think is acceptable and unacceptable. But we're magnifying female victimhood and male perpetration whilst simultaneously minimising female perpetration and male victimhood.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes part of the problem. And I think what one person, regardless of whether they're being male or female, thinks is sexual harassment crossing the line, another person might think is different. And I think what you have is certain organisations out there, very big, very well-known organisations, that are not kind of taking a rational, logical approach. They're saying, what? Someone whistled at you in the street and it really made you feel scared and panicky. That's sexual harassment. That's terrible. Well, okay, if that's how you felt, okay, that's valid. We'll talk about that. We'll work with it and so on. But actually, let's get a bit of perspective here, yeah? And what you've got is a number of organisations really magnifying certain things. And as someone said to me on Twitter a while ago, said there is a difference between risk and danger. You might feel at risk, you might feel scared, but is there an actual danger? And I think, with the murder of Sarah Everard, which of course was horrific and, just awful, and we would not want that to happen to anybody at all. What we have people say now is comments like, all these men murdering all these women. All these men, well, actually, if we look at the data, it's something like 0.0001% of men in England and Wales. It's the vast minority. And what maybe we need to think of is actually the vast majority of men, the overwhelming, think it's horrific that there are people out there abusing and killing and murdering girls and women. The vast majority of people would never do this. They would more likely step in and stop it, or they would not get involved at all. And actually, let's think about it. The vast majority of police officers, rescue workers, firefighters, bouncers, most of them, the overwhelming majority of the people in those industries collectively are men. And they've taken those jobs predominantly because of this natural feeling inside to want to look after and protect girls and women, not to abuse them. Yeah. And that's what we have to kind of remember. But again, what we do is we minimise the good that men do and magnify the bad that they do.
And you mentioned this earlier. I'm really interested as to why this happens, because off the back of, say, the Sarah Everard case, of course, what has happened is kind of this collective stereotype of men. And I think you mentioned earlier, you wouldn't do that with any other demographic. So, you wouldn't criticise Islam off the acts of ISIS, for example. That would be ridiculous. But for some reason, there seems to be an acceptance to label and stereotype men as a whole for the actions of a tiny few. Why do we allow that, but we wouldn't allow that with any other demographic?
Well, I mean, there's lots of theories around that. So one is that, well, men are the oppressors, so they can't be the oppressed. Now, that's a very rigid black and white way of thinking. Life doesn't work like that. It also promotes the theory that collective identity is more important than individual identity. I'm a man. I certainly don't want to be expected to apologise for the crimes that other men have done in the past just because we share the same genitalia. Not at all. And I think there is those that go, well, actually, hang on, look, men are the problem. Men have done these things. Men rape more, men abuse more, and all of this. And it might be, well, actually, if you look at certain data, some data says, yeah, men do perpetrate certain types of abuse more than women? Yes. However, there's other data, and again, it depends on what data set you're looking at and what research you're at. There are certain types of abuse that women and men perpetrate more or less at equal rates, such as domestic abuse. There's dozens of ships, coercive control, domestic abuse, violence, they perpetrate at equal rates. But, you know, the powers that be in government tend to ignore that research and focus on other stuff that promotes ideology. But I think, you know, in answer to your question, what we as a certain chunk of society is doing, we're saying that, well, most harm, or the extreme harm on the planet, is being caused by men, and it's been like that forever, so it's absolutely fine to demonise all men. But that itself, that is just a perfect example of misandry. And if you think it's not, then I struggle to see how you can logically say it's not, because what you're saying is you're taking the abusive behaviours that a significant minority of men on the planet do, and you're using that to judge all men. Yeah, and again, it's like, why is that okay to do with the men as a group, but no other group? And it's just hateful. But the problem is there are lots of people, and boys that have messaged me have said, not all of them, but some of them have said they're nervous about speaking out about this because they're worried if they challenge it that there's going to be so many, you know, extremely viciously assertive people that go, you hate women, you're a misogynist, rah, 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 etc. It's like, no, not at all. That's not what anyone's... And now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are some people out there that are very narrow-minded and are very misogynistic, and that doesn't help at all either. But the boys and men that I've been speaking to, or most of them, have said, how can I say to some of these girls at my school that I don't want to be seen as a potential rapist because I've got a willy between my legs, and because of what the minority of men do? How can I say that without sounding like a misogynist? Well, I would say you're not sounding like a misogynist, but because you're challenging the narrative and encouraging critical thinking, people will just start screaming and shouting misogyny with no rational thought. And if we think about it, let's break it down. Misogyny, again, generally, in my experience, is referred to as the hatred or contempt for girls and women because they're female. Just like misandry is the sort of equivalent of boys and men. But something horrible that happens to a girl or a woman, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's happened to them because they are female. Just like someone doing something abusive and horrible to a boy or a man, misandry is not necessarily a motive. It can be, but it's not necessarily a motivating factor. And I think there's a growing number of people that are saying, oh, look, these men, these husbands that are punching their wives, for example, that's evidence of misogyny. It's not. It's motivated by hatred and contempt for the female sex. Maybe he did, but actually, maybe he didn't. And there is a number of research papers out there that highlight motivating factors in regards to people that have perpetrated abuse. And issues around misogyny is very, very low. It's absolutely very low. You know, it's the case of, well, actually, it's about inappropriate ways of expressing emotion. It's struggling to control your emotion and things like that. So again, we have to kind of get some perspective.
I wanted to build on something that you just said, actually, because obviously working in the field of sociology as I do, I've sat through many discussions on feminism and gender inequality and so on. And what does worry me is that even if a male does attempt to suggest that there may possibly be some things that work against men, or that men can face gender inequality or even sexism, it's very, very quickly shut down. And there seems to be this view that you can't be sexist towards a man. But surely if you're judging a male or stereotyping or treating them differently based on their sex, by its nature, that is sexism, isn't it?
Absolutely. It makes no logical sense. So I've had these conversations with people. So what I would say is, okay, so let's just think about this. Okay. So if we say, would we agree that someone who says or believes men are scum, men are trash, men are the abusers and so on, you know, so first of all, what we'd have to do is explore that and understand someone's definition of misandry, understand someone's definition of sexism and misogyny and so on, okay? So that is where we would start it. But actually what I would say is if you can't be sexist towards men, it's very difficult to evidence a negative. You've got to evidence a positive. So I would be kind of responding to that by saying, okay, here are some examples of sexism towards men. And there are loads, and I often share these. Here's an example, here's an example, here's an example, here's an example. And people would say, well, that's not sexism. I mean, okay, how is it not sexism? And I find there's often two responses. They would either say, well, no, that's just being horrible towards men because they're men. That's not sexism. So I will frown and feel a bit confused. I went, well, why? I went, well, because it's not towards women. Oh, okay, so you are defining sexism as prejudice towards girls and women because of their sex. Yes, right. But that's your definition. If you are going to use that definition, then nothing else will apply. But that's not the accurate definition, yeah? And it depends where you're getting your definition from. But the other part is that I find that people are saying, yes, but girls and women have got this, there's all these problems that girls, and they'll list them off, ... okay? And some of that, in my view, is valid. Some of it, I'm not sure if it is. It depends on what they're saying. But I say, well, yeah, all of that exists, and that is sexism towards girls and women, okay. But that doesn't mean there is no sexism towards boys and men at all. But often then what you do is you carry on the discussion. I find that what a lot of people are saying is, well, sexism for girls and women is bad, it's horrible, it's terrible, it's widespread, and it's systemic. Okay, it's not that bad for boys and men. So then we go, oh, okay. So now what you're saying is it does exist, but it's worse for girls and women and not for boys and men. Well, actually, first of all, I would say let's not make it a competition. Why can't we just accept there are certain disadvantages that uniquely and disproportionately affect girls and women? And some of that is because they are female that needs looking at. There are other disadvantages and suffering that uniquely and disproportionately affects boys and men. And sometimes that is because they are male, sometimes it's not. That also needs suffering. But to promote this very rigid view that, well, sexism can only happen to girls and women and not, it just doesn't make any sense. How can it? It just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand how it cannot be sexism. It makes no sense. We can argue that it's different to girls and women. We can argue that maybe the effects, the methods, but it's still sexism. Yeah. Of course it is. How can it not be? You know, as we go through... the perfect example, well, there's many examples, but one at the minute is, as I said earlier, lining boys up and getting them to apologise to girls for the crimes of other men because they are men. Yeah. If that's not an example of misandry, of sexism, I really don't know what is. But you have individuals that want to hog the victim spotlight. That's what they want to do. And it's the case of, well, there's not just one spotlight, okay? There can be a few. But it's almost that the spotlight has got to be on issues affecting girls and women. And I'm all for that. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. Any issues affecting girls and women, they need addressing and so on. But I'm not for, or I'm not supporting, keeping boys and men in the dark.
Yeah, and maybe I could make this a final question, Phil. Sorry, I'm taking up your time, but it's a great conversation. You just said about keeping in the dark. This is one of the things that really worries me. You know, these discussions often come up on International Men's Day, and the discussion is often, why do men need a day? And when you list the statistics, they're more likely to die younger, they're more likely to fail in education, they're more likely to be arrested, they're more likely to die at work. Quite often the reaction is, well, yeah, but apart from that. And I just think that's shocking. We're talking about men losing their lives. And when you say, do you think that's a justifiable reason to look into it? People kind of see that as insignificant.
Yeah. And again, because they are men. That's why. And that's the reason. Because if you say to someone, if you think that the statistics and everything we've shared with you are insignificant, what is the reason you think that's insignificant? And in the vast majority of cases, it's not because of how they're dying, when they're dying and all of that. It's because they're men. It's like, right, so what you're saying is we can dismiss the suffering and disadvantages experienced by boys and men because they're male. How can you not see that as misandry or sexism? That is a narrative that is it's a very ugly narrative, but it's one that's being promoted. And it's a case of, well, even if it is worse for girls and women, and I'm not sure that language is helpful, it leans towards making things a competition, which I don't think is good. But even if that is the case, well, it doesn't mean that boys and men have got it really easy. It doesn't mean that they've got a great, all of that. Where's the outrage at the number of men who die in workplace-related deaths? Where's the outrage? Where's the campaigns to do something about that? There isn't any. There isn't any, because it's only men, yeah? I guarantee you, if it was the other way around, there would be a mass outcry. Yeah, and again, it's because we live in a society that kind of looks towards protecting women, nurturing women, making sure, and I'm all for that. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm all for that. But not when we are keeping boys and men in the dark to the extent that we are. And I think if we're, often I say to people, so all these people that are killing themselves, that's okay. You think that's okay? No. And what you often get is you get them to the point where they acknowledge their misandry. They won't call it that, but if someone is so rigid in their thinking in their head that misandry just doesn't exist, well, they won't be able to acknowledge it or recognise it when they're displaying it. And what we have to try and do is pick our arguments and pick our battles. Sometimes, if you can't have rational and reasonable discussions and debates with people, I often find it's best to ignore and avoid, because you can't, I think you can't have a rational, reasonable debate or discussion with someone who is refusing to engage in something that's rational or logical. But if you can, and, there's a bit of hope there, then maybe it's worth thinking, okay, so let's have a discussion about this. So what are you saying? Are you saying that all these people killing themselves, that's terrible, but it's worse for women, not for men? Why do you think that? What's your thinking behind that? Where does that come from? And often you get all of this narrow-minded, rigid thinking that, well, men are the oppressors, not the oppressed. You can't be the oppressors and the oppressed. Yes, you can. Yes, you absolutely can, because it's not as black and white as, well, you're either one group, you can't be, or anything like that. It's just not true. There was an incident recently where someone had posted an article, and in the article it highlighted that that when it comes to victims of violent crime, statistically speaking, men are victims more than women, which, again, from the Office of National Statistics, that's true. And people going, oh my God, you hate women, you're terrible, you're misogynistic, and all of that sort of stuff. It's men doing this. Oh yeah, it's men doing it. It's men doing it. And again, there's this strong implication that if men are suffering, and that suffering is caused by other men, it doesn't matter, we should dismiss it and all of that. Well, if we take that theory, let's say, okay, so when women and girls are suffering in whatever way, and it's caused by other girls and women, should we dismiss that? Should we do that? So I've worked, I've kind of tweeted about this recently. Some women that I know, I've been told that, it's very interesting, there's different views. If you don't want to have a family and you don't want to have children, you are a failure as a woman. Others have been told, well, no, if you actually want to be a stay-at-home mum, you are betraying the sisterhood and you're an insult to feminism. It's like, actually, just let this person choose whatever she wants to do. If she wants to be a stay-at-home mum and that's her choice, fine. If she doesn't want that, wants to go out to work and do it, fine. If she wants both to some degree, fine. It's about choice. But in my experience, you don't get loads of men saying to women, you must be a stay-at-home mum. Maybe in the years ago you did, and maybe to some degree that happens now. But I think in the main, you do not get these men pressuring women, you must be a stay-at-home mum or you must go to, etc. You get other women doing that. But the point is, regardless of the specifics, if women are the main perpetrators of a certain type of abuse, regardless of how severe it is, to other women, does that mean we should dismiss it because women are doing it to women? No, of course we shouldn't at all, regardless of whether men are doing it to women, women are doing it to men are doing it to men, women are doing it to women. It has adverse effects. And actually, I think when people are saying, yeah, but men's problems are by other men, that's just another excuse to dismiss and minimise the suffering of men, and actually, kind of promote misandry without even realising you're doing it.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you. Is it growing in a momentum, by the way? Do you think you're getting more and more popularity and more people listening? Because I hope they are.
I think so. I think, and like I said, I'm not the only one. There are other people out there, other people who challenge these issues in a I don't know, I guess I would say a much more aggressive way than I do. And then others are a little bit more relaxed than me. Everyone's got their own style, I guess. But yeah, I think more people are talking about it, but I think more people are trying to raise awareness, and there are a great number of people out there, very, intelligent, experienced, academic researchers, lots of people who've got other experience as well, and they are challenging it in different ways. And we do need more people to challenge it, but we need to challenge it in an appropriate way. So, I've seen horrible comments online, not many, but, I suppose I'm not looking for them, but I've seen horrible comments online that have blamed women, been really derogatory towards women. That is horrific. That's horrible. That's misogynistic, and that's not okay. Of course it's not. And most of the men I've spoken to have said, yeah, that's horrible. I would never say that. Whilst there's a growing number of men, in my view, and women, to be fair, who are kind of saying, stop promoting misandry, men don't deserve this, stop punishing the vast majority of men for the extreme actions of the minority. That's just hateful. It's irrational. You've also got, I think, a growing number of boys and men, but in my experience, mainly boys, who are kind of scared to challenge it, who are scared to challenge it. And it's like, I can't challenge it. And actually, this is what these people want. They don't want us to challenge it. They want us to shut up, put up, and deal with the misandry that's put our way. And you know what? Some boys and men will go, yeah, I'll put up with it. Up to them, and that's what they think. But more of them are going, this is not okay, and we need to speak up about this. But it's about how we speak up about it. And, I think often my view is to try and respond to it with just logic and less emotion, and respond to it with a rational way of looking at it. Just kind of trying to have a discussion in a way that's very rational. Do you agree with this? This is what I'm thinking. What do you think of this?
So, Phil, what I'll get you to do is, if it's all right, I always ask people at the end just to give their details if they want to get in touch, follow you on Twitter, find out more about your work.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to check out my website, they can. That's just counsellingwithphil.co.uk. And if they are interested in following me on Twitter, it's Phil Mitchell 83. And again, I think there's plenty. There's a lot of people out there on Twitter who speak about these issues, who have got a lot more knowledge and experience than I have in it. But again, I think we all share knowledge and we all support each other. But yeah, as I've said, my website is counsellingwithphil.co.uk, and my Twitter handle is Phil Mitchell 83.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Phil. Lots of food for thought there, and I hope it gets the discussions going in the classroom as well.
Yeah, not a problem.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Take good care then. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.
The Sociology Show podcast relies on the kind contributions of sponsorship and donations. If you enjoy the show, then you can help with the hosting costs by donating as little as £5 on the GoFundMe page. Simply visit uk.gofundme.com and search for The Sociology Show. If you can donate, then you will be sent a Sociology Show pen as a small thank you for your continued support of the show.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the podcast. If you would like to contact the show or be interviewed, then please email the sociologyshowpodcast@gmail.com.